Morning, good afternoon, good evening for many of you. So happy to have you with us. We have a very special masterclass this morning, and we did exclusive inviting. So we are thrilled to have you with us joining this masterclass today, talking about storytelling, such an important topic in for everyone in our work. And I couldn't be more excited with the three people that will be leading us today through this 3 hour session. So, what we will be doing today, we will be first listening to our wonderful authors that are guiding us on storytelling. And then we'll have short breakout groups. You should have all received a notice on the breakout group that you have registered for, and that will be a half-hour breakout group. And then we'll come back together again as a full group to wrap it up. So I hope you have your water ready, you have a cup of coffee or something that keeps you awake, because it's going to, well, I'm not worried that you're going to fall asleep, because it's going to be a super interesting session. Have your pens ready, because they will be sharpened today. That's what the storytelling is all about. And before we start, I would like to say, please use the chat. Please use your hands if you want to raise. This is an interactive session. We on purpose made it small so that you have a chance to ask questions. We will try to put in some interactive moments and pauses, but there's going to be exercises. So do please participate fully as much as you can with this, which is possible on an online format. Before I hand over the floor, I'm going to introduce our wonderful speakers. So let me just share a slide that gives you a little bit of the background so you can read along with me. So we have three fantastic authors, and I know you already probably know them, but I'm giving you a quick background. Maria Smilios, she's an award-winning author of The Black Angels, and I hope you all had the chance to read that book with such a fantastic historical outline on the nurses in New York City in the beginning 1900s. Her work was recognized widely, and she has won about 4 or 5 awards. I'm not going to name them all, but we will make sure that everything, the full bio, is going to be on our website for the readout afterwards in the news report. Maria, thrilled to have you with us and share all your experiences. Maria also teaches at Columbia University on science, communication, and writing. So you'll get some real academic flavor and techniques from Maria. And then we have with us Handaa Enkh-Amgalan. Handaa is a fantastic writer, and I'm hoping you have all read the book Stigmatized. Handaa comes from the perspective of actually having gone through tuberculosis herself, and she originally from Mongolia is now has lived recently in Uganda working on refugees, but now she's based in Berlin. And Handaa has written down her life story and her various experiences in a book that really touched me. So I definitely recommend everyone to read that if you want to get a bit of a picture on what it is to go through TB as a young person. And the beautiful part about Handaa, she turns everything into hope, even though you're in the midst of some dark moments. So that is something that I hope she can shine a little bit of light on today as well. But really thrilled to have you with us, Handaa. And finally, last but not least, we have Vidya Krishnan. Vidya is an investigative journalist based in India. She's joining us from Goa. She has written several really fantastic pieces and doesn't shy away from telling the truth, which is really an important thing and brave. Very happy that she also has written a phenomenal book, Phantom Plague, that really goes into many of the systemic issues that are troubling TB and the world and people that are suffering from TB. She's written it in such eloquent ways and has done a full-on investigative historical perspective. And I think John Green must have picked up some of your clues and hints in the YouTube that he has put out there as a 1 hour class on TB. And I will share all these links in the chat for you to look at their books, each of their books, and also some of the additional things. So pleased to have these fantastic three women really take the stage. And so I will stop sharing, because you will not want to hear from me. You want to hear from all three of them. Thank you so much for helping us put this masterclass together. I'm sure our participants are in for a treat. So I'm going to be quiet. I'll try, and I'm going to hand over to Vidya to kick off this wonderful masterclass. Vidya, it's over to you.
Thank you, Petra, for that generous introduction. We've been planning this for so long, so I'm really excited that we're finally doing this. I am in gallery view of my Zoom. And if I may request everyone, this is going to be an interactive, we are going to get to know each other a little bit because writing is personal. So if you are in a position, could you please let me see your shiny, happy faces? Um, that is my first request. And we are going to do a quick thank you. Thank you. I see some of the faces. Duty, I see you there. Um, all right. So this is like a quick icebreaker. I know Joel is handling the tech and I know Petra has a lot of logistics, but I'd invite everyone to participate in this. We are doing a quick exercise called 6-word stories. And it starts with legend has it, writing legend has it, that Hemingway was in a bar bet. A friend of him bet him if he could tell a novel in 6 words. And I think you've heard it everywhere, but this is what he came up with. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. It's a 6-word, beautiful novel. It's, in 6 words, he tells you a story which makes you ask, okay, what happened? Did the baby die? What happened? It's just one of those cramming so much meaning into 6 little words. I'm going to request you all, we'll give you 10 minutes of time to give me a 6-word memoir of yours. Tell me something about yourself in 6 words. It could be anything. It doesn't have to be really stressful. The one tip is it always works when it's personal. And the word constraint, it looks like a constraint, but it's designed to actually fuel creativity. And a good 6-word story basically it's a standalone. It tells a story in and of by itself. And I like an example would be ex-husband and nanny bought a house together, you know, one of those. And I did like as an exercise, I wanted you to share some of my life. So this is a 6-word story on a post-it. If you can't read, it says writer, insecure, creative, insecure, creative, insecure. That's me. We will now give you time to kind of tell us something about yourself as you go along. You can press that hand button on Zoom. And I hope you share it. There is no bad thing. There is no, I'd invite Maria and Handaa also to tell us a little about yourself in 6 words. I'm going to stop now. And if anyone has questions, if you want to talk through this, we can do that. Just unmute yourself, but also mute yourself back so someone else can speak. Oh, I see a lovely story from Kayuri Bhanushali. I quietly explore, yet I'm fearlessly bold. This is perfect. This is exactly, you've gone like, yeah, take a few minutes. We are just going to wait here, write 6 words down, and then you can share it in the chat window. Kayuri, well done. I would just make it shorter by making I am into a single word, so it's not 7 words. And thank you for sharing and being the first one to share. So we get past it is an icebreaker. Deepan has shared a lovely 6-word story. I'm a poet expressing my inner world. It's so perfect. We have another story. A tired mom who's full of energy. I am loving it. Please keep them coming. We have another one. Swimming through life, I guess. challenge to challenge. That's Alan. Sharif is saying, I am what I am. Lovely. We have so many. I see Maria and Handa. You guys, just the writers, yet to share. My life is full of paradoxes. That is from Meera Puturaj. That's a very noisy bird behind me, if you heard that. Duty has shared creative girl on an extraordinary journey. Perfect. Thank you for sharing that, Duty. Amber, a mother exploring purpose of myself. Yeah, I guess motherhood can do that. Naomi is saying living each day at a time. Yevin is learning and trying to stay peaceful. Aren't we all? Aren't we all? Dr. Nath has one. I know a guy who knows a guy who can get things done. It's a little bit more than 6 words. We can shorten it. But yeah, we all need a friend like Dr. Nath who knows a guy who knows a guy. Um, Travu has one. Master of staring at blank pages. Love it. I love it. Data friendly, family oriented, love storytelling. That's Charles. A cheer mom friendly lecture. Determined to using my voice for good. That's Sarah. There's one more I missed. There's a 6-word story that says it is not easy to express myself. Rabia has one. My daughter doesn't like boarding schools. Yeah, that's a standalone. That's a standalone that asks me more, makes me go, tell me more about your daughter, about boarding schools. So in these 6 words, we are like the exercise was designed to prove that we are all storytellers, and look at the lovely array of stories we already have. Is there anyone here who hasn't? I see we have 31 participants. I don't know how many stories we've already have in the chat box. Uh, is there anyone who hasn't shared their stories? I would welcome you because we are also fast running out of time. This is, we have 3 or 4 minutes left if I'm not wrong. Isn't that right, Joel?
That's right. And we have about 32 participants, so we can keep sharing in the chat. If you want to get started with the program, I think we can, and we can interject if there's a really good one. We can pick them up in the Q&A session after Maria's talk, or after your talk, or after Handa's talk. So anytime. So please keep sharing your wonderful 6-word expressions of yourself. And maybe you can wrap it up, Vidya, and hand over to Maria.
Yeah, do we have a minute, or should I just?
Yeah, you have a minute.
Okay. I'm going to give just another minute if you have. I know Maria and Handa haven't shared their 6-word stories, so no pressure. I'm going to wait and then we will. Far from home, traveling the world. Lovely, Jessica. All right.
anyone who's just joined us, because there's still a few people who are new, we're just kicking you into a writing exercise with pick only 6 words and describe yourselves. They can be poetic, they can be expressive, but something that intrigues the writer to read the reader to want to know more about yourself. So I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone who hasn't written down yet.
Yeah, well, we have Maria's. Did you hear about what happened? That encapsulates you pretty well, telling your story. Did you hear about what happened? I love serving the community. All right. We are, I think, just in time for, so the entire, I hope it sets the tune for, we are all going to get to know each other through this. And I want everyone to feel comfortable. This is a safe space where you can share all sorts of ideas. We have one more, Charity, Daydreamer Love Stories. Um, thank you for sharing. I think we are at time for our first lecture, which is from Maria about the intersection of science communication and storytelling, uh, which is uh, which is why we are here. Maria, over to you.
Thank you, Handaa. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening, because I know this is a global event. I am in Asheville, North Carolina. I'm on Eastern Standard Time, so it's early in the morning for me. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for putting this together. Thank you for joining us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about bearing witness, narrative humility, and patient stories, and how do you tell a narrative and take these complex scientific terms, whether it's about medicine or somebody's sickness or whatever they might be going through. It could be they're drinking water that's toxic. It could be they're living in a food desert, and how do you take these ideas and these statistics and fold them into a narrative that becomes accessible to the layperson? I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. Feel free at any point to, as Vidya said, this is interactive, to jump in, to pose a question. So I like it when we can go back and forth, or you can save the questions to the end. My name is Maria Smilios. I'm the author of the book, The Black Angels. It tells the story of a group of African-American nurses who were called up from the Jim Crow South in the 1920s to avert a public health crisis in New York City. The crisis was set off by the white nurses who had worked at Seaview, and they began quitting for a variety of reasons. The main reason was, at the time, at the end of the 1920s, in New York City, white working women had plenty of jobs that wouldn't kill them. They could be librarians, telephone operators, and so these nurses began leaving, and the city found itself in a pinch. Seaview Hospital was a woefully understaffed and underfunded municipal TB sanatorium. It was set on the island of Staten Island. So New York is made up of 5 boroughs. Staten Island is one of the boroughs. And at the time, it was completely disconnected from the other boroughs. Now there's a bridge that goes from Brooklyn to Staten Island. At the time, you could only get there by ferry boat. It was agrarian. It was this bucolic place. And they built this sanatorium, and they set it 400 feet above sea level in this remote area. So to get from Manhattan to Staten Island, you needed to take a train, a ferry, and a bus. At its peak, it had a patient population of 1,800 men, women, and children. It was one of the few sanatoriums that also had a labor and delivery ward. So there were babies who were also born at Seaview. The patient population at Seaview was predominantly immigrants that had come over from Europe hoping for a better life, and African Americans, and then anyone else who lived on the margins of society. And that could include, at the time, they were called Bowery bums, prostitutes. And at its peak, it had 1,800 men and women. The hospital was only designed to have about 1,600. The city would send people who had tuberculosis to Seaview Hospital. They were considered, quote, immoral, uncouth, indigent, uncultured Americans, and they were sent there to languish and die. We have to remember that this was also before the advent of any kind of antibiotics. The first antibiotic came into play in the mid 1930s, and it didn't arrive in the United States till 1937. So we're talking about, there was nothing that people could do for somebody who had tuberculosis except for fresh air and the rest cure. I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with tuberculosis. I'm going to assume some familiarity, but TB is a disease that stigmatizes and ostracizes. It's a social disease of poverty. And the people who are infected in New York City, these people were living in tenements. At the time, they were in this area called the Lower East Side. There were 80,000 five-story tenement buildings that housed 2.3 million people. That was 2/3 of New York's population. They were crowded, they were dirty, there were no windows, and it was a breeding ground for tuberculosis. So the people who were getting sick mainly were living there, and the city considered them filthy and dirty. They were nothing more than the sum of their illness. So to city officials, they were inhumane. For me, one of the most important things to convey in my book, which is a commercial nonfiction book, was not just the story of the nurses, but the story of the patients, because the story of the nurses can't exist without the story of the patients. I also knew to be really effective, I needed to do it in a way that the science of tuberculosis, meaning the pathology, etiology, what it did to the body inside and out, was accessible to a lay audience. You know, there's a lot of mythology surrounding tuberculosis, especially in the United States. People here, when I was told people, the book took me 8 years. People here, when I told them I was writing a book, it was about tuberculosis, would say to me, why are you doing that? It's already cured. We don't have a TB problem anymore. Or, oh, TB is not a big deal. It's like bronchitis. Or nobody gets tuberculosis anymore. Or the best things that I heard is, we're all vaccinated against TB, you know? So I needed people to be able to not only understand the disease, but really see the devastation that it wreaks on the body at a time when there was no cure. So this brings me to the heart of my talk. How can we write stories about other people, people who have suffered an illness, and do it? And I say this to my students in we have three things to think about it. We have to do it in a meaningful way, in a respectful way, and in a way that a lay audience will understand and empathize with the person without changing their story. Because as a journalist, as a nonfiction writer, the one thing you cannot do, as much as you'd like to bend the truth, is bend the truth. So that's really important. And it's a question that nagged at me when I was writing the book. I knew I needed to impart how devastating this illness was, also on the psyche and the emotions. So I got lucky. The doctor who ran the first drug trials of isoniazid in New York City, his son was alive, Dr. Robachek, and his son gave me his father's papers. And in those papers were the names of the original trial patients. And so I tracked 2 of them down. And the 2 people that I tracked down were in their 90s. One was from Puerto Rico. She had immigrated here. And another was a young African-American woman who had lived in Staten Island. Her family had escaped the South in 1935 in a small Alabama town, and they came up to Staten Island. And she got tuberculosis at 19, and the other woman also got TB at 19. And just to give you an indication of the stigma of this disease, the woman who came from Puerto Rico, Milagros, when I called her, she answered the phone and I said, "Hi, my name is Maria. I'm writing this book. Your name is on this list of trial patients." She said to me, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Were you part of a drug trial in 1952 at Seaview Hospital?" And she closed the phone. So I called back and I started again. And she said to me, I don't know what you're talking about. And she closed the phone again. She was at her daughter's house, and her daughter took the phone and dialed me back. And she said, "Who is this?" So I told her, and she said, "My mother never had tuberculosis." And I said, "I'm sorry, I must be mistaken. It must be another Milagros Delfast." The next day, I get a call from the daughter, and she said to me, "I'm very sorry." She said, you are correct. My mother did have tuberculosis, and she never told anybody. So for 70 years, this woman harbored this secret. The only person that knew was her daughter. was her sister. She didn't tell her husband. She didn't tell her family. And now I had kind of, the cat got out of the bag. And so thus began this journey of healing for her as well. She was afraid to let anybody know. She thought that I was going to tell her knitting circle, and these women were going to stigmatize her the way she had been stigmatized in the past. So I thought, how do I tell this woman's story with this type of, I wanted to respect her story and respect her. So I'm going to give you a little aside. When I was in graduate school, I went to Boston University. I studied with Elie Wiesel. For those who are not familiar with him, he was a survivor of Auschwitz, and he wrote one of the most extraordinary books I've ever read, Night. He was also an incredible lecturer and advocate for peace. On the first day of class, he walked in and he rolled up his sleeve and he said, I know you're all, are going to want to see this. So he just showed us the number. And then he looked at us and he said, so you have just borne witness to something. And what does that mean? It means when you see something or hear something or read something, you can't turn away from it. And as human beings, he said, it's our moral obligation to stand up to injustices, whether they are as grand as the Holocaust or as small as somebody slamming a door in someone's face. So for me, who just always as a kid had this, nod towards social justice, this sparked something inside of me. And I thought, oh my goodness, I want to live my life in this kind of way. And I knew I wanted to write. And I thought, I'm going to approach writing in this way whenever possible. If I am writing about something that is not fiction, I want to write about it in a way that does justice to the issue I'm writing about. So for this book, it was really important that I approached it in that way. So what does it mean to bear witness to something, right? It means to see an event, to have knowledge from personal observation or experience. As a writer and a listener, it also, and a journalist who's let's take Milagros. I sat down and I started talking to her. It means that you are being trusted with intimate information. It means strangers, people that you have never met, letting you into a world, right? And by virtue of them talking to you, you are being pulled into their story and you are witnessing their story from a different perspective than from the time it happened. And so you have a responsibility to that. And as a journalist, I always tell my students, your responsibility is to be truthful. It is to keep your opinion to yourself. So for example, if you're writing on a recovering addict, a drug addict, which, a number of students did, it's not your place to say, I think you made a really bad decision. You should never have done that in your life, right? You're not there to give your opinion. When you're writing, you're there to listen, to listen intently and to take down the information that's being given. And when somebody doesn't want to share something, you move on. You can't force somebody to say something. Also, when it comes to quoting and to writing this, you want to quote verbatim. It might sound better if the quote had been like that, but if it's not, you need to modify what you're writing. You have to work around the story that's being told to you. So, when we're writing about patient stories, especially an illness like tuberculosis, which is what I'm going to focus on right now, a lot of these people, and maybe Handaa can talk to this more later, have been stigmatized. They have been othered. What does it mean to be othered? It's a way of negating somebody's humanity. It's believing that you're better than someone because of your race, ethnicity, religious beliefs, political affiliation, or gender, right? Essentially, it becomes an us versus them mentality. And it plays a role in the formation of prejudice, not just when it comes to race, but also when it comes to sickness. We saw this in the United States with COVID. When COVID hit and, Trump was president, he tried to turn it into a Chinese disease, an Asian disease to other people, right? We saw it with AIDS as well. It was a gay disease. While tuberculosis in New York City at the time was considered a disease of, the uncouth, uncultured Americans. So when we look at public health, we see so many examples of how people are othered. They're shamed for socioeconomic status. They're stigmatized because of a disease. They're blamed for living in places that don't have adequate housing or clean water, that can ultimately make them sick. Vidya and I have had lots of conversations about this, the places people live and how they are treated. So now that we have this framework, right? How do we take this idea of bearing witness to somebody telling you their story and people who have been othered and write about it in a way that is truthful and respectful and objective? So I want to talk a little bit about this thing called narrative humility, which is what guided me in writing, the stories of my patients and also the stories of the nurses, because this book did two things. It wasn't just the story of the patients that were othered. It was the story of these African-American nurses who were also considered less than. They were considered second-class citizens in the United States. I can talk about this whole idea for hours, but it is something that is important, and it's something that is being taught more and more in med schools, this notion of narrative humility. It means that patient stories are not objects that we can comprehend or master, right? Our job is not to master the story. Our job is to listen to the story. Patient stories are stories that begin way before the illness started. So when I was talking to Milagros, yes, I wanted to know everything about tuberculosis, how it affected her and what happened. But I also needed to know her life beforehand, what had brought her to the United States, what had put her in these positions, what had made her not want to go to a doctor for a long time, making her illness become worse and worse. So these stories are dynamic entities, and we engage with them while remaining open to their ambiguity and contradictions, right? It's not for us to fill in those ambiguities. It's to work around them. We have to keep also checking ourselves and our own role in the process. As I said, if you're doing a story on somebody who's addicted to, drugs, or somebody who is living in poverty, it's not for you to say, well, find a way out, and I know that might sound funny, but the truth is there's a lot of people that do that. They give their opinion. Expectations. I always say this: don't anticipate or assume a story is going to be what you want it to be. Often it's not. And if you can't work with it and you want to write something about it, you either need to change your focus or find somebody else to tell you a different story. But it is not on you to fix somebody else's story. And I can't stress that enough, because that's one of the most important things when you're writing science. So now that we've been able to engage this person, let's say they're open and they tell you their story, how do you write about it? How do you write about it for a lay audience, right? How do you take all these scientific terms and these things that it does inside the body, and make it accessible? Let's take TB, right? When I began writing this book, I didn't know a thing about tuberculosis. I didn't know how the disease worked, how it moved through the body, what it looked like, the areas it affected. And so I began talking to people, lots of people. And the first person I talked to was an expert at Columbia University. He studied the social determinants of tuberculosis. And I remember I was sitting with him and he was explaining this to me one day. And it was like, my brain was working so hard to hold everything he was saying, and I was recording him, and I thought, I'm going to get home and I'm going to be stuck. And he saw it on my face and he said, do you want me to talk in simpler terms? And I said, yes, please do. But even when he did that, it didn't help, because I wanted this microbe. Scientists are wonderful, but they have a really hard time making diseases come alive. I wanted the microbe to come alive. I wanted people to grasp the personality of, the TB microbe. So after, months, I took all the science I was reading and I literally drew the microbe. I put eyes and ears and arms and legs and a mouth on it with big teeth. And I started interrogating it in the same way I would interrogate a person, right? I started asking it like, what do you look like? How do you move? How do you infect somebody? Who do you infect? What attributes do you have? How do you protect yourself against antibiotics? What do you do when you go inside someone's body? I knew that this was a beautifully rendered microbe. It was designed to torture and kill. And it was wrapped in fatty lipids, right? And that made it impervious to antibiotics, but the lay person's not going to understand it's wrapped in fatty lipids, right? So I took my drawing and I was like, what adjectives would I give you? I would say you're wily, you're stealth, you're arrogant, you're mean, you're also patient, You like to lurk in corners. You like dark places. You're kind of like a bat, right? But you also love oxygen. You need it to survive. And that's why when you go in the body, you like to go to the lungs first, because it's this beautiful, warm, oxygen-rich environment. And it's like you're wrapped in this blanket and you feel good there. And so that is how I began to write about this disease in terms that was extremely accessible. You know, when I talked about what it did inside the body, I was like, you know, I looked at those teeth that I had drawn at it. I was like, you gnaw, you know, you rip things apart, you tear through muscle, through tissue, through organs, through bones. In children, it loved the spine. For some reason, it loves children's spines, and it gnawed away at those bones. It was like a chisel, you know, and it chiseled away at the vertebrae until they collapsed. So essentially, what I'm saying to you is any disease that you're writing about, if you're listening to patient stories, listen to them with humility and write about them as if they are, you know, the disease itself, whether it's cancer, I don't care what it is, you know, the virus, interrogate it, find human attributes, pin them onto it. And that is the best way to write it to an accessible audience, because everyone understands arrogance. It's an arrogant microbe, right? And suddenly people are like, oh, wow, okay. So I think I'm out of time. I'm going to turn this over to, I believe it's Handaa or Vidya that's next. I don't have the thing in front of me.
Handaa.
Handaa, thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to turn it over to the wonderful Handaa, who's going to tell you more about experiencing this, you know, arrogant microbe.
Thank you, Maria. Hi, everybody. Hope everyone is doing well. First of all, I would like to thank everybody who showed up and made time available out of your schedule to be here. And I also want to thank TBPPM Learning Network and McGill University for this opportunity to engage with you all and with the two wonderful authors, Maria and Vidya. So yeah, it's really real pleasure to be here. So my session, I will briefly share my screen. I hope that's okay with the setting. Okay, I'll try to. Great, I hope everybody can see it.
It's loading. It's
Okay.
still black.
Is it there?
Now we can see it, but it's not in full screen. It shows the next slide on the side.
Ah. How do
You need to go to display settings at the top.
Okay, and then?
And duplicate slideshow, the second.
How about now?
It's loading. Give it a second. No. Let's try the bottom. Oh, yes, yes. Here we go.
Okay.
It's perfect.
Great, thank you. So yeah, today at the plenary level, my session will focus on how to frame and amplify voices of people affected by tuberculosis. And I'm glad to see that in the group there are people who are affected by TB and now advocating to end this illness and its stigma. So, and also I know from the survey that there are many people who are also interested in learning how to engage with affected people in the most ethical and respectful way. So hopefully this session will be helpful for you. And I included this quote, and it's a great segue from Maria's session about the narrative humility that she was referring to. And I really liked this definition, so I just wanted to put it up there so that as you write about other people's intimate stories of overcoming illnesses such as tuberculosis, you can keep this narrative humility in mind. It is the sense of humility toward that which we don't know, the face of the other, the face we cannot know, but to which we are responsible. So hope you keep that in mind as you work on your writing projects. So with that, before I start, I will introduce myself briefly. My name is Handaa Enkh-Amgalan, and I'm an author of the book titled Stigmatized. It is a book that shares my personal story of overcoming tuberculosis and its attached stigma, most importantly in my story. And this book aims to destigmatize and raise awareness in the public. And I published this book about 4 years ago. And in the past 4 years, I've been actively advocating in this space. And most recently, I had the pleasure of calling world leaders for urgent action to end TB, as we adopted political declarations of TB at the UN high-level meeting last year. And currently I serve on the WHO Civil Society Task Force to advise on TB programs and policies in how can we engage people affected by TB in these solutions. So that's a little bit about me. And as I wrote in the chat on the exercise that Vidya led this today with the 6 words, mine were, I think it's a little bit more than 6 words, but it was duality of a TB survivor advocating for others while navigating my own lived experience. That's exactly how my journey has been. There's always that tension or that duality that exists within me. I want to advocate for other people, but at the same time, it is such a vulnerable and sensitive story and personal details. So I always struggled with that tension. So if there are TB survivors who feel that way, I hope it makes you feel better that you're not the only one who feels that way. And regardless of that tension, still deciding to advocate and be in this space and pushing for change is something very brave thing to do. And I hope more and more storytellers will advocate in this space, and many of you will as well. So with that, I wanted to first start off with why we need to engage narratives in our writing and our storytelling and our advocacy. As we all know, TB affects millions of people around the world. I believe the latest statistic is 1.4 million people who died of TB in 2022. And when we talk about TB, we talk about these statistics and these numbers in reports, right? But when you look closely into it, behind 1.4 million, that statistic, we are talking about 1.4 million human lives, right? And human stories and their loved ones who are affected by this experience. And oftentimes we don't know the faces of these people, right? So as storytellers, we have that responsibility to humanize these statistics, right? So that solutions and policies and programs, decisions that are being made to end TB have that personal touch, have that humanized element to it. So it's really important to engage these TB narratives, and as storytellers, we have the power on how we frame it, right? And depending on how we frame it, we can either humanize or we can victimize the experience of TB survivors. So knowing this privilege that you have with your pen or with your laptop, it's important to understand some of the tools and recommendations to influence empathy and bridge that gap between public health and personal experience. So that's my goal for today, to explore some of these ethical approaches on how we can empower TB survivors and how we can engage them in driving TB narratives so that we can achieve solutions and end tuberculosis. So these are some of the harmful practices and ethical approaches, and these all were driven by my personal experiences. And I'll be very honest with you all that I have made many mistakes in these areas, and unintentionally perpetuated some of these harmful practices. So through learning and unlearning, I have started adopting some of these approaches so that I can demand others to engage affected people in a more ethical way. So hopefully these first-hand experiences will be helpful. The very first one I have on the list is reducing individuals to only survivor labels. So this is something that I have started demanding from event organizers or researchers or whoever wants to engage with TB affected communities in their projects, right? And my main rationale is that affected people by TB have a full identity, right? Beyond TB survivor. We have survived the illness, but beyond that, we are professionals. We are contributing to society in many different ways, right? So fixing individuals as victims or as survivors based on a single moment of their life, to me, is not the full picture. So it's important to acknowledge that full professional identity of TB survivors, and engaging them in a more wider perspective is really important. And sometimes people can say it's only a label. Why are we fixating on this, right? But this language, these labels are actually very important. Let's take an example. You are put on the agenda of an event or of a writing project, right? As a TB survivor who contributed. What will be the expectation for you? For you, the main expectation will be to talk about how you survived the illness or what were the challenges. So it's only focusing on that element rather than also talking about solutions, right? Because survivors are the ones who experience this firsthand. So they have an idea for what could work, right? So fixating them as only survivors or victims focuses on the challenges, but not engaging them fully in the solutions aspect. So it's really important to acknowledge that full identity of TB survivors. So that's something I have started adopting in my engagement for TB advocacy. Another area is related to quotes and testimonials. It's often the most popular form of engaging affected people. However, without meaningful engagement, it can be a form of tokenism on the panels or research projects, writing. If you are only given an opportunity to provide a quote without understanding the full context of the project, what's the scope of this project? What's the goal of this project? Who is it trying to reach? What's the solution? Without knowing all this background, just giving a single quote is not meaningfully engaging TB survivors. So oftentimes when I'm asked to be part of TB advocacy, I ask more about the background, and I encourage you all to do the same, and ask to have a meeting, to ask questions about the event, what kind of preparation support that they can give you. And as TB advocates myself, and I don't have any medical background. So when I'm, for example, engaged in panel discussions or research papers that are looking at it from medical lens, I don't quite understand what is being discussed, right? So it's really important to prepare and engage TB survivors so that they understand what they're contributing towards, so that it's not seen as something separate, which is exactly what tokenism is all about, right? It's something separate, but not integrated. So that's what I would encourage you all to consider when it comes to quotes and testimonials. Another aspect I wanted to also mention is pressuring survivors to share their stories of misery or victimhood, right? Without only focusing on the challenges, I briefly touched on it at the beginning. It's important to also focus on the achievements, right? they did survive, and it's a story of hope and empowerment. And they are now working to advocate and trying to be part of solutions, right? So balancing that approach is really important to empower our survivors and allowing them to share their stories on their own terms. Because again, it is a very intimate story. It's a personal story, sensitive, and especially with TB that comes with a lot of stigma, social stigma, self-stigma. It's important to be to allow that freedom for survivors on how they want to share their stories with your audience. Another point I wanted to make is related to specific details or explicit images, right, from their most vulnerable time of this illness. This is where, as journalists or media people or storytellers, we need to be very careful. In the past, one of the mistakes I did as an eager TB advocate who had just started this journey was to sort of assume that everybody wants the best for me as a TB survivor. But unfortunately, that's not the case. They have their own projects. They want to make sure it's read by more readers. They want to achieve certain goals. Of course, they need to be held accountable, but you as the speaker, you as the TB survivor advocate, you need to demand these things from them so that there's shared accountability. Because imagine if you share something that you feel uncomfortable in the event, after the event, who is going to go through the trauma? Who is going to heal from that triggered uncomfortable feelings? The event organizers are not going to be there with you after the event, right? It is only you who is going to heal through that process. So you have to be fully comfortable with whatever you share and start demanding these things from people who are approaching you for engagement. And when engaging TB survivors, reframing your research goals or your project goals to focus more on the structural determinants, for example, stigma, access to care, maybe it's related to education, neighborhood, socioeconomic context. So looking at it from this bigger lens can also help to engage affected people to contribute, to feel that they are part of the solutions. They are indeed part of the solutions, right? So that they are considered as active contributors beyond their illness, and they are equals as yourselves who are leading the research projects or your other advocacy campaigns. So I wanted to share these based on my experiences, and my main call to action at the plenary level will be to engage with ethical approaches in mind, especially when it comes to empowering people and allowing them to contribute meaningfully into your projects or other campaigns. So I wanted to also leave some time for Q&A. I'm not sure if I have time, but if not, at the breakout group, I have some practical, we can look at specific examples that I prepared and other practical aspects of things. But do I have time for a brief Q&A, or that's for the breakout group?
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, Handaa, you have time to take 5 minutes for questions and answers for sure.
Great. So I'll stop sharing my screen and see.
Thank you so much, Handaa. That was very powerful, and I've kind of put you as part of the larger group, and I'm encouraging anyone who has any questions for Handaa to bring them up now. If you have questions for Maria, hold on to them. We will pick them up afterwards, but I would like to give you a chance to ask Handaa some questions to really talk a little bit about what she just shared. Don't be shy. This is a lovely space, and you've been really great in sharing things on the chat. So please raise your hands. This is a wonderful opportunity to ask some questions or share your own thoughts.
If no one has a question, I have one queued up, but I don't want to monopolize Handaa's time. Okay. Okay, Neha, go for it.
And then Charles.
Hi, good evening to one and all. Thank you, Maria and Handaa, for such a lovely session. My question is on the third point under the harmful practices. You mentioned that we shall not mention or showcase the pictures from, I'd like to call TB survivors for now, because that's the whole point. So I want to understand if we can't show the images or the visuals from their past recovery, as you mentioned that it can perpetuate the pain points, which is absolutely true. I would, as a narrator, how can I bind that narrative around, the whole recovery process if I cannot go back and visualize the entire recovery process of the patient? Thank you.
Great. Charles, do you want to go next, and then I can respond in one go? Or if it's a question for Maria, yeah.
Mine's not a question per se, just a takeaway from the two presentations so far. I think what I've come to realize is that, for you to really tell the story for a TB survivor or any disease or whatever, you really need to be in the shoes of that person. You really need to be in their space. That show of empathy must be there, and that is the only one way that you can really get them to talk. And also you yourself, you will better tell a story if you put yourself in the shoes of, of that person. So that's one takeaway I've gotten from these two presentations. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Charles. Exactly right. Yes, I like that empathy approach. So Neha's question, it will be a question depending on the comfort level of the person that you're engaging with, right? From my perspective, it's important to focus on the empowerment aspect, showcasing their stories in a positive light rather than focusing only on the misery, for example. So even if you do engage them with images, I hope you keep that in mind to showcase their stories, and if they feel comfortable sharing, right, from that empowering aspect. And the second point I wanted to make is you asked about how do I visualize it? And I think that's where exactly what that quote was talking about, right? Narrative humility, where it's the sense of humility toward that which we don't know, the face of the other, the face we cannot know, but to which we are responsible. So my simple answer to you is you probably cannot visualize, right? But you should feel responsible to find out as much as possible, do your research, engage with them, talk to them, try to put them yourself in the shoes of them, as Charles mentioned. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Great answers, and great questions, both of you, and thanks for the comments, Charles. If there's no further questions at the moment, then I keep your thoughts, because we would love to hear from each of you some of your reflections as Charles was sharing. But in that case, I'm going to ask Vidya now to share some of her thoughts, and we can reopen the questions and answer session immediately after Vidya speaks. So, and you can always put your thoughts in the chat as well. We can pick them up. So please, Vidya, take the floor over from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra, and Handaa. Thank you for Maria, Handaa, both. It was just so, I learned so much just being just hearing your process of writing, Maria, and Handaa, of like hearing you talk made me doubly be careful about approaching people when I interview with more empathy, more compassion, with more homework at my end and more research. So thank you. I'm going to insist on your shiny, happy faces. I need those faces to kind of, thank you, Charles. Everyone who's in a position to, thank you very much. I see you guys. So I shared a link of an opinion column because I assume you guys are going to write an opinion and not a report for a newspaper. So I shared this piece in the Atlantic, which according to me breaks every rule of writing. It uses the language that it's a writer that who's written about someone dying, and generally the culture, no matter where we come from, whether it's the East or the West, the culture is we don't like to tread on someone who's dead. We don't like to tread on their graves. Not Hunter Thompson. Which is, I don't, have you guys read the column that I shared? Just a show of hands. Did you guys read it? The link? Okay, nice. So I'm gonna just read along some bits that I highlighted in the piece. So Hunter Thompson wrote it when Richard Nixon died, and he also wrote it for one of the most pretentious rag in journalism, the Atlantic Monthly. And look at the kind of language he's using. Okay, he starts with Richard Nixon is gone and I'm poorer for it. He was a real thing, a political monster straight out of Grendel, a very dangerous enemy. He could shake your hand and stab you in the back at the same time. This is the first sentence. And this is what a good opinion column does. It kind of grabs you by the throat. And it's language that's not polite. And it gets to the deep truth very quickly. Like he's using, like even in the first sentence, he's not even 10 words in. And he's a political monster straight out of Grendel. Grendel is this epic. He's this character from Beowulf. I don't know. Again, I don't expect anyone to know literature at that level, but what the trick he's doing is that he's letting the epic do the work for him. It's in the first sentence, and he expects you to know, have some brand recall, that he's an evil guy, not just like a regular evil guy who would, kick a puppy in the face. He's like, he's the evil, the stereotype of evil on which epics are written. And all of this he does so efficiently in like the first 2 sentences. And then he comes to, there are, when you want to write anything, again, because I feel like you will be writing opinions more or opinions first, there are 2 ways to approach it. You can either go with chronology or you can go with a theme. So a usual chronology for a eulogy would be, oh, this person was born at so-and-so time, and this is what they achieved, and then they died. What he does here is a more tricky one. He goes with a theme. An evil person has died, and I am going to make sure everyone knows how exactly evil Richard Nixon was. Look at the second paragraph. Again, it's one of my favorite pieces of writing, precisely because it breaks every writing rule that we teach in classes. He says, Nixon had the unique ability to make his enemies seem honorable, and we developed a keen sense of fraternity. Some of my best friends have hated Nixon all their lives. My mother hates Nixon, my son hates Nixon, I hate Nixon, and this hatred has brought us together. It's funny, it is deeply personal. Do you see how visceral it is? It's it's words that are felt and then poured over in a document. And this kind of writing is always going to be very different from the kind of writing that, you practice and you're polite, and, that's the bread and butter for a lot of writing. But then there is this kind of writing, which is a different league altogether. And then he's also funny because his next sentence is, Nixon laughed when I told him this. He said, don't worry, I too am a family man and we feel the same way about you. So, he's when you know what you're doing, like from start to end, when you know whatever it is that you're writing about, say you're sitting down to write about how TB patients are stigmatized. And if you have thought through from start to end in your head, we all do it, like you're fighting with your boyfriend or your partner, and you're practicing the argument in front of an invisible jury, right? And then he'll say this, and then I'll say that. And, you have to do that with the reader. And when you do it organically all the way through, you can just toy. You can just toy with the reader the way Hunter Thompson's doing here. Like he's making jokes, he's being angry. So this is the first two paragraphs, the key sentences I read from the first two paragraphs, and it does two things. It grabs the attention, and then comes the trick question, real question. What do you do now with the attention that you have? And as a writer, what you need to do is make it so now you have the reader's attention. And the trick here is the reader comes to the article wanting to know, what does the writer care about? Who does the writer care about? And whoever this character is, what does that person stand for? Do you see how there is a degree of detachment? So you're talking about TB, and within TB, what is it that you care about? So there is a degree of difference. And as we go forward, I'll tell you, I will give an example of this showing and telling. There are these two tricks in writing, but let's get through this column before we get to that. So we are still in the third paragraph, and look how much he's packing. He says, as long as Nixon was politically alive, and he was all the way to the end, we could always be sure of finding the enemy on the low road. There was no need to look anywhere else for the evil bastard. He had the fighting instincts of a badger trapped by hounds. The badger would roll over on its back and emit a smell of death, which confuses the dogs and lures them in for the traditional ripping and tearing action. But it is usually the badger who does the ripping and the tearing. The badger, it is a beast that fights best on its back, rolling under the throat of the enemy and seizing it by the head with all four claws. This is like really violent writing, but what he's essentially, the technique that he's using, he's making the universal in specific. So he's using this universal theme of how a badger goes in for a kill. And he's using this particular very visual example, very violent example of what a badger does to show what Richard Nixon does to his enemies. And I will again, if you went back to the first para, I will really recommend you go back to this link and read it on your own time. He set this up. He set the third paragraph up in the first paragraph, where he said that he could shake your hand and stab you in the back, which allows him in the third paragraph to say all of this nasty, really violent thing. And I again must emphasize, he's doing this in the Atlantic. So if you know exactly what you're doing, you can get away with pretty much everything, like including calling a dead president a bastard. Okay, we move on. Now he basically is setting up his case. He's making his case with brilliant research. He's basically saying that I'm going to go, here again, look at, there are 3 or 4 paragraphs I'm skipping because there's again like this gem of a paragraph. If the right people had been in charge of Nixon's funeral, his casket would have been launched into the open sewage canals that empty into the ocean just south of Los Angeles. He was a swine of a man and jabbering dupe of a president. Nixon was so crooked that he needed servants to help him screw his pants every morning. Even his funeral was illegal. He was queer in the deepest way. His body should have been buried in a trash bin. Now, this is like a really harsh thing to say about someone. And this is exactly the kind, again, I see Swapna saying the writing is so visual. Exactly. He, if you know what you're doing, if you, if you know how to use tricks of, say, like if in Eastern storytelling, if you can use the Mahabharata or the Ramayana and the characters like Shakuni, who's the stereotype of evil, and let them do the work of gravity, as against the question to Handa was, how do I say how painful the journey of this patient was. You don't have to, if you're clever about it, if you do your research, you actually don't have to say, oh, this person was gaunt and suffered. Someone who suffers from TB, if you have empathy, you already know what you're doing. All you then need to know is find a parallel in an epic, or find, like, you can, again, the 6-word exercise that I did, you can be very efficient with a word limit and find like a pop culture parallel, or just say a fashion show, a Gucci model on a ramp. That's how she looked, without actually going into the misery. There are many ways to come at this if you know what you're doing. Now we've set up, this is the introduction. He has you by the collar by this time, and he has you convinced, even if you don't know anything about Richard Nixon and you just landed from up some other planet, you're like, okay, this person sounds like an evil man. Then he sets up the stake. And what is at stake? History. History itself is at stake. He says, let there be no mistake in the history books about Richard Nixon. He was an evil man, and evil in the way that only those who believe in the physical reality of the devil can understand it. He was utterly without ethics or morals or any bedrock sense of decency. Nobody trusted him, except maybe the Stalinist Chinese or the honest historians will remember him mainly as a rat who kept scrambling to get back on the ship. So now he's setting up what's at stake. And then he builds on it. So you moved on, like you don't have to. One of the mistakes I see writers who are learning to write is that once you set up, okay, this is what TB is, you can set up in 3 paragraphs and then move on to the next point. What's at stake? Why are you telling this story? And he keeps building the stake in the next paragraph. He says that it is fitting that Richard Nixon's final gesture to the American people was clearly illegal series of howitzer blasts, a 21 series howitzer blast that shattered the peace of a residential neighborhood and permanently disturbed many children. Neighbors complained about the unsanctioned burial in the yard and said it was brazenly illegal. Then he has a quote of someone, and the quote says, "It makes the whole neighborhood feel like a graveyard. It fucks up my children's sense of values." Do you see he's already used words like bastard and it fucks up? Here again, I would like to say, in writing culture and popular culture, we like to say that you have to be neutral and you have to stay away from writing. But then we just lived through a deeply traumatizing pandemic. And if you use it carefully, anger is actually a very powerful tool. It's not a liability, it's actually a weapon, which has this capacity to drink the ocean one drop at a time, and then process it, sit with it, and put it out in an opinion in this way. Moving on, I'm just moving forward. Then again, like, there is this 3-sentence which is so beautifully analytical, which shows that the person has done his research and he knows what he's talking about. He says that he talks about, in the meantime, he's brought in Kissinger, and he says Kissinger was the only one of the many historians who suddenly came to see Nixon as more than the sum of his many squalid parts. He seemed to be saying that history will not have to absolve Nixon because Nixon has already done it himself in a massive act of will and crazed arrogance that already ranks him supreme, along with the Nietzschean supermen like Hitler and Jesus and Bismarck and Emperor Hirohito. And do you see he goes from Jesus to Hitler to Bismarck? This is again someone who has so much depth and so much pop culture that is crammed into this. So when you're writing about TB, you don't have to be like, that horror. Let me correct myself. Sometimes you have to be like that horse with that tunnel vision. I'm only talking about TB and only talking about TB and paragraph after paragraph after paragraph. It's about the bacterium. But sometimes this is a writing tool. You can entirely zoom out and let pop culture seep in and, drop references that the readers would know, not from TB, but, it's their references. Like in my book, I start my book with Dracula with a very specific reason that if you let the reader feel like you're talking about something they already know, they like to kind of engage a little bit more because you're challenging something that they know and then subverting it. Then comes a paragraph, which is again very important these days, I feel, for writing. And Hunter Thompson kind of, when you're being so controversial, you also have to address it before someone else criticizes it. So you take away the reader's right to criticize the language, because here he says, some people will say that the words like scum and rotten are wrong for objective journalism, which is true, but they miss the point. It was the built-in blind spot of objective rules and dogma that allowed Nixon to slither into the White House in the first place. He looks so good on paper that most people vote for him sight unseen. And do you see, he kind of says that, I see you will say I am angry, and then addresses it. So he takes away the power that you will have to criticize him. And then the next paragraph is basically in journalism what we call the nut graph, where you are telling the reader why you're reading this rant, that's been fired off by this man, where he talks about Hitler's Nixon's meteoric rise, the unemployment crisis, it's basically analysis about the election which put Nixon in power. And again, we are more than 3/4 through this opinion piece. And I want to point out that Watergate has not been mentioned as yet. Do you see, his best hits have not even come in as yet. This is a writer at the peak of his craft who's just toying with the rules. So as many as there are rules, and you have to know the rules to toy with them. He does come to Watergate, and I'm going to read that paragraph. For Nixon, the loss of Hoover led inevitably to the disaster of Watergate. It meant hiring a new director who turned out to be an unfortunate toady named Patrick Gray, who squealed like a pig in hot oil the first time Nixon leaned on him. Gray panicked and fingered White House counsel John Dean, who refused to take the rap and rolled over instead on Nixon, who was trapped like a rat by Dean's relentless, vengeful testimony and went all to pieces right in front of our eyes on television. That was Watergate in a nut. For people with seriously diminished attention span, the real story is a lot longer and reads like a textbook on human treachery. And again, this is 8 sentences. He does not go into Watergate. He does not explain what Watergate is, because he expects the reader, which again, Atlantic expects you to come to the piece. If you're reading it, we expect you to come to the piece with some information. So you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. And he does this. He's like, The real story is a lot longer and reads like a textbook example of human treachery. And these are all, again, read this column on your own time. It is a textbook case of how to write an opinion column. There are 4 very good paragraphs that I am again jumping through, which goes through the court procedures and then what happened to Nixon. Then he talks about the people Nixon surrounded himself with. Again, this is a eulogy to Nixon. He says that Nixon administration, he compares them to Caligula, and he's like, all of them were brutal, brain damaged degenerates, worse than any hitman out of The Godfather. Yet they were the men Richard Nixon trusted the most. Together, they defined his presidency. Nixon's spirit will be with us for the rest of our lives. Whether you're me or Bill Clinton or Kurt Cobain or Archbishop Tutu or Amy Fisher or Boris Yeltsin's daughter or her fiance's 16-year-old beer-drunk brother with braided goatee and his whole life like a thundercloud in front of him. This is not a generational thing. You don't even have to know Richard Nixon to be a victim of his ugly Nazi spirit. He has poisoned the water forever. Nixon will be remembered as a classic case of a smart man shitting in his own nest. But he also shat in our nests. And that was a crime that history will burn on his memory like a brand. By disgracing and degrading the presidency of the United States, by fleeing the White House like a diseased rat, Richard Nixon broke the heart of the American dream. This is the last sentence. Now, 2 things he does. The last paragraph that I read to you, if you read this piece on your own time, you will see what we writers call a closed loop writing. If you read the first paragraph and the last paragraph together, they are seamless. So you start at a point and you think of your argument as a circle, and you end at the same point that you started at. So the starting paragraph and the ending paragraph are pretty much interchangeable, because you start like, it's like me telling you a story about this treacherous man, and then I'm coming back to the circle where I'm saying, what was a larger point? That he poisoned the well for generations to come, and he broke the heart of the American dream. And that's, in essence, a good opinion piece. It is, it almost, to me, I love it. I love it so much because it breaks every rules. It abuses, it uses cuss words, but there is so much mastery in it. It does this thing where it takes you on a journey of this man, Hunter Thompson's hate, his personal relationship with Richard Nixon. And by the time you come out of it, you've been through this very personal relationship that Hunter Thompson had with Richard Nixon. So, what you could do, like Handaa was speaking, every survivor has a very personal journey with TB, which is not the same. Everyone has, and the trick here is whatever kind of writing that you want to do, you have to read more of that kind of writing. You have to always read more than you're writing. And say, if you like Richard Nixon, Hunter Thompson's column is very what we call voicey. You know the personality of Hunter Thompson when you're done with it. And that's the kind of opinion columns I like. I like to know who is talking to me. And I think with that, I'm going to stop and take questions. I don't know how we are doing on time.
You're doing great. We're all doing great. We have now 15 minutes for questions and answers, and there's some fantastic questions in the chat that I would like to call on, but I would like to just say, does anyone want to raise their hands before I moderate the questions?
There is one writing trick I want to leave you with. We call it showing and telling. So a showing sentence is like, Anjali parked her car and stepped out in the sun. So you're saying this person, Anjali, she had a car, she parked it, and she stepped out in the sun. You are telling the reader what happened. What's showing is Anjali shifted the gear into park. She got out of her VW bug and had to shield her eyes from the blazing afternoon sun. Do you see how one is you're taking the reader with the specifics. One is showing, the other is telling. And telling is always, one step far away, and showing makes the reader feel like they are watching you do that thing. And it's both are good techniques to master. Showing is actually always good writing.
Thank you so much, Vidya. And for everyone who was confused about the article, I only had shared the article with those of you that had chosen the breakout group with Vidya. So the article is now in the chat. So you can read it quietly after. And thank you for guiding us through it and reading it out, because I think that helped for those that didn't read it beforehand. And it's such powerful visual language. So there are some great questions in the chat, and I'm just gonna prompt two, but I would love to see hands. And I also think the discussion that got 10 likes with Handaa on whether or not how to use pictures, I think was worth to spend a little bit more time on that issue as well. The questions that, so please everyone raise your hands, because this is your chance to reflect on what you've heard, what you've learned, but also to ask a question if you want, or raise your comment. I think the 2 points that I wanted to pick out of the chat and to start us off is Dr. Ravindra put in the chat that as a medical person, and a lot of people in the tuberculosis world, professionals are coming from a medical background, you're taught to write the story about your patient in a sort of very neutral, medicalized perspective. And he also brings up the point of AI. And those are both ways where I think it's almost the opposite of what Vidya and Handaa just talked about. You're taking some of the emotion out of the story. And so I would love to hear, Maria, Vidya, and Handaa, your thoughts about how do we use AI in the best way in writing in this new world that we're venturing in as one topic. And the second issue is which Manvi have put forward, that in writing, there's often you write the story, you use the stories of TB survivors to break through some of the monotony of trying to illustrate what you're achieving to a donor, like a case study on the side. How can we do that best? And that leads into what Handaa is also talking about in the chat, but not using the negative images of someone who is really struggling with tuberculosis. So maybe we can talk about both of those things for a few minutes with the full audience. And I don't know who wants to kick off. And I hope you're not hearing the background noise from the very loud lawnmower that is racing around in the park. So apologies if that's the case.
Thank you, Petra, and thank you, Dr. Nath, for that question. I very quickly want to address this AI thing. It keeps coming up, especially to writers. I was somewhere and a friend of mine's like, oh, aren't you using AI? AI is going to leave writers jobless. And I was like, I don't have a job to begin with. AI can have my no job. The thing with, if you are an amateur writer or if you're trying to learn to write, AI is really, really helpful. But one must always remember that at the end of the day, it's a machine and an algorithm which doesn't have individualized personal experience. But more importantly for me, it doesn't have your morality or ethics or experience of colonialism or, gender or, if you are a sexual minority or a religious minority. AI can't handle all of that. What it can give you is a story structure. Like I took you through and again, that depends. If you want to use AI, I would suggest that you work on polishing, sharpening your prompts that you give to AI. So if you give it a very specific prompt, it can give you a structure with then you can inject with your voice and your morality and your, whatever it is that you are trying to do. And perhaps it can work for you. I don't use AI. I feel like it slows me down. Frankly, I feel irritated when I use AI. I will let Maria and Handaa.
Yeah, so AI came up when I was teaching this class, and I decided, there's 3 ways that you could go. Don't allow it, but they have to cite it, or allow it. I allowed it if they cited it. I told them I didn't want AI writing their final pieces, which was a human-centered story with a public health issue wrapped around it. I could go on and on about AI and what it's doing to writing and what's happening in the writing world with AI. But I would say if you're writing a story about tuberculosis and survivors and somebody who suffered, I almost find it like, why would you turn to AI when you have this human being in front of you who's willing to talk with you? Now, if you want to turn to AI to help you formulate a summary of something, I guess that's okay. I don't use it for the same reasons that Vidya did. I find it clunky, and I find it actually impairs me. I get confused. As much as I hate the struggle with words, I like the struggle with words. I like to think about what I want to say and how I want to say it, and how all of those things that Vidya talked about and Handaa talked about play out. How do I get the thematic? Where do I tell? Where do I show? I think AI goes back to the first part of this question, the de-identification. AI can't tell the nuance of a human being. It doesn't know race. It doesn't know ethnicity. It doesn't know history. I think, that all of those things are important when somebody is telling you their story. A story begins way before it gets to the point where it needs to be told. In narrative medicine, they're saying, like, when people go in, let's say with a tumor, the story of that tumor is the tumor now and where it could go in the future, right? And so it's either could be cured or not cured, or maybe stabilized. But what happened before that? That's the story that we want to get at least I do as a journalist, and as to paint a fuller picture, so we don't have to rely on these images. You know what I mean? Like, if you can when I got the story of Milagros, I didn't need an image for her when she was sick and suffering, because I knew her whole backstory. I knew why she had come to the United States. I knew she was working in a box factory for no money, 12 hours a day, in 100-degree heat, with roaches skittering around. Like, I didn't need you to see her suffering, because I could tell you it, because I sat and I listened to it again and again, and I asked for those details. So, I think, I don't know if that's fully answering the picture, but with AI can't do that. And if you want that full, authentic picture of somebody's story, you have to ask them. There is nothing that AI could give you that will bring you into that moment where you can see it and feel it and taste it, and then give that to your reader.
Yeah.
Handaa?
Yeah, Maria, thank you. I completely agree. But also, I just want to clarify, Dr. Ravindranath, what we are saying is the concept of engaging survivors, actual human beings, and bringing these narratives out there. We all agree that's important, and that should be the case. But the how is where we are coming in, right? How do you engage them in a more ethical and respectful way, asking for their permission, and like thinking about these photos, like showing them in a positive light, like the how is where we are emphasizing, not the concept itself. I just want to make sure that's clear, because I just see the words like de-identification or using AI, that type of thing. I think engaging them is really important. And I think there was one person who also said that we really need to build the capacity and empower affected communities to come forward and share their stories, right? I think that's really key. That's important. That's how we're going to end this illness, right? But how we go about it is a whole different picture that we are discussing. So yeah, in that light, I agree that we should continue to engage with actual human beings and not relying on AI. I think, I completely agree with Maria, but I think the confusion was about that how aspect I wanted to clarify. And then also I wanted to quickly mention that there was another question. Okay, I think that's all. Those were the two key parts that Dr. Nath raised. Yep.
There was the other question was about the donor. I sorry, Petra, did you did you want to say something? Okay. The thing about there was a question about how do you write specifically if you say want to get donors. This is the thing I mentioned during, how when you are having a fight with your partner or your mom or your kid, and it goes on and on and on in your head, like you're in your head, like practice, you're driving and you're practicing the fight, and then he'll say that, and then I will say this, and then that's it. Then I will win the argument. You know how he practices. If you're writing a column, I would advise you that you do that with whatever it is you're writing, because following it through to the end purpose actually gives you the clarity of exactly like what are they going to say to you, and then you can build that in in your column, the response. And the thing is, there are three kinds of writing. One of the clarity that you get is you realize what you're writing for. There are three ways you can use your opinion piece. You can either use it to generate awareness, just dissemination of information, which we do as advocacy all the time. The other one is, a call to action, or say this kind of a thing where you're generating funds. Or like a third one is, around like event centered, like we now have an event in Bali, or it's around understanding. So if you have clarity, start to end about what you are, think about the column you're writing like a worker on a construction site. You have to put the foundations first and then the load bearing beam before you start putting your clever lines. What I see are often mistakes in columns that I see is there is a clever line in the intro, and then there is a clever line at the end, and the middle of it kind of doesn't engage with the reader, doesn't think of the reader as a person who is taking out time and giving it to you. So you have to be worthy of that reader's time. And all of this, this psychotic thing that I'm saying, this neurosis, that you sit with an argument and you have that invisible argument, it's actually a part of the process. You sound crazy, but all writers, it is, you have to make room for a little bit of crazy.
There's a follow-up question. Is Petra, are we okay to go there? About if you should engage the families of the affected patients. And for me, when I was writing the book, I think it is important to do that, but you should get permission from them. People who are taking care of people or who are affected, families are also affected by tuberculosis or by any illness, So I think it's important. It adds to that fullness that I was talking about, that backstory of why you don't need images that are shocking. Because, if you talk to the mom and you hear, well, whoever it is, mom, dad, grandma, I don't know, the primary caregiver in this family, and they say, yeah, I can't work anymore. I can't hold a job down because I'm spending 40 hours a week taking care of somebody. Look at my home. It's not clean anymore. Or whatever they say, my other children are being neglected. My spouse is, that adds that fullness and that power to how much an illness can take, not just from the person who's sick, but from the whole family or even community. And then if that person has been, and Handaa maybe can talk about this more, stigmatized from a community, what does that mean? What does that mean for the community or for the family? At Seaview, many of the children were just dropped off at the hospital and orphaned because not only could the parents not take care of them, but it was a stigma upon the entire family to have somebody sick with TB and be interacting with them. they would lose their jobs, they would lose their status in this community. So they orphaned the children, and that was important for me to know about. When I spoke to the survivors, one of them, Mamie Daniels, her family didn't come up and visit her because they had 6 other kids. And what we consider now Child Protective Services was on her family all the time. As a matter of fact, they did take away one of the boys. He didn't have TB. They took it away as a preventive measure because they believed that the mother was not taking care of the children okay. So yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying I think we should engage whoever is involved, but get permission. Don't do it behind someone's back.
That's great. And Vidya, before you step in, or Handaa, before you step in, I just wanted to put one last question before we go into a quick break and then in our breakout groups. There's one question in the chat that I think is also really important, like how to balance the technical details and the human emotions. And maybe we can take that up as a last question before we go into the break. And I'd love to hear from all 3 of you. Vidya, do you want to kick it off? I see your hand is up. Thank you, Maggie, for that question.
Thank you for both of these. These are really good questions. So Maria spoke of, the fullness of an article when you speak to the family. Now, let's say you don't have anyone. It's an orphan. It's one person. How do you create a full profile? Now, if you're writing, I would like you to think about it as almost as cooking. There are some people who are really good at making 4-ingredient dishes. And there are some people who make a biryani with like many, 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 many things in it. And both have their own skills and both have their own power. So if you, again, it's this thing that you don't need the mother to tell you that it hurt her. You don't need to feel, you don't need a law degree to understand injustice. So if you read more, which is why I keep saying that whatever you're writing, if you read the literature of that kind, say adjacent to it, you will always find the words that you're looking for. So always read more than you're writing. And if you look in my book, I profile Nandita Venkatesan, who I'm sure many of you know. And I did get to spend time with her family, but I actually did not use a lot of what her family, how her family was like, because it's almost like saying that you have to be valued by 4 other people for your life to matter. Even if you're just your own person, the skill of writing is such, or the skill of, say, cooking is such, that if you have just like 2 things, you should still be able to like make a potato soup with like just potato and salt. That is yummy. And none of these are challenges that should stop you. And the same thing applies to managing the technical things with the profile, say, of a patient. I personally look at science as broccoli that you slip in a meal. And I know Maria does this as well, where you wrap the science around a person. So, you see like when I was talking about how Nandita found out that she could not hear, I did not say it like that. I said that Nandita had a phone and she was listening to the music and she could see the iPhone, she could see the song play, but she could not hear it. And it's a visual trick to do it. So again, reading more makes you a better writer. I will stop at this.
For me, that's the most important thing. It's taking that human and wrapping the science around it. It's the science part of it. And when you read really good narrative fiction, that's science, it reads easy. Some people actually think it's fiction. They're like, wait, but for the writer to get, there are paragraphs in my book that took, hours and hours and hours of research. And it's like 2 sentences. And it doesn't look like it's like hard level science, but it is hard level science, So I think it's important for people to, I just want to pair it what Vidya said, read every kind of book. There's so much of fiction when you write narrative nonfiction. That's why it's narrative nonfiction. You're telling a story. There's a beginning, middle, and end, and there's that constant what happened next. That's what makes people put down books, because there's no drive to know what happened next. You don't care about the character. You have to care about the person before you care about the science. You know, nobody wants to read that there were X amount of micro blah, blah, blahs in the water. They want to read about what the water did to the person. And then you tell them that's because the levels of, you know, chemicals in the water had spiked. You know, once you're invested in the person, you'll read the science. And the science is gentle. It's exactly what Vidya said. It's just slipped in there. It floats you along. And then you leave and you're like, oh, wow, this is really messed up.
Just to sorry, a monopoly. You know, in the opinion column that we read, you know, where he talks about the badger on the back, that visual violent thing. These are the kind of tools you can use, which are universal, to convey the violence of a bacterium that's just inside, like the enemy within. Or again, you read more, you find these, but the whole thing is to make like the universal intimate. And you know, you don't need a photograph. Like, I'll never forget the badger on the back and Richard Nixon. That's actually more powerful than you know, a photo that I will not remember the minute I, you know, not look at the column.
Yeah, thank you. I really like what Maria said in terms of like, once you're invested in the story as a person, or if that's person's journey, no matter how dry the statistics can be without that story, you will like be interested to find out like why Handaa was stigmatized, but why? Like, I'm really rooting for her. She's trying to get an education. She's trying to do these things, but why? Why is society stigmatizing her? And then looking at, oh, okay, here are the statistics. This is why XYZ percentage of the population is living in poverty, and poverty has its own stigma. Oh, now I get it. Like that full picture. I think looking at it that way, I think will really help you to find balance. But of course, it's not easy, right? It's difficult to combine these two things, but finding that niche and yeah, exactly what Maria said, wrapping the statistics around the human story so that people naturally feel that I have to find out about this.
Thank you so much, all. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you all for these wonderful presentations and the thought-provoking messages that you shared with us all three. As promised in our program, we're taking a 10-minute break so that everyone can get a quick refreshment, a bathroom break, whatever you need to do. And when we come back, we'll go into groups, in smaller groups, to do some exercises and really speak on a one-on-one basis. So I'm going to put a timer on for 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, we'll be back here. And then from here, we'll go into groups. So thank you all for staying with us. Please come back.
Before you go, everyone in my group, the six-word story, that if you participated in that and if you have a six-word story, no stress at all. Just think on it in the breakout session. We are going to see if we can flesh that out into, say, 600 words. What would you put in that? Just bullet points, nothing. You don't have to write anything. We can also just jam like in the session, in the group out, and do this together. But just think about it if you're in my group. All right.
Perfect. So I shared the books and a quick book review. They're all available on various sites, Amazon.com. Various places where you can share the books from our wonderful speakers. I just picked a random, somewhat neutral review, I was hoping, but I'm sure they have their own resources that they're willing to share with you as well for further reading and learning. I also shared a video crash course from John Green that picks up from, I think, from all three authors actually, learnings, and really visualizes in a beautiful, powerful way. So for those of you that are visual learners, that is a really good 50-minute crash course on tuberculosis, learning how to play with images and with text and history around the disease. So please be back in a few minutes, in 10 minutes, and we'll see you soon. Thank you all. And we're back. We have, in theory, 15 more seconds, but I turned the timer off the screen just to kind of show our faces to lead us into the breakout groups. I'm really happy to see that most of you stayed, so this is great. That means we have a good group to have a breakout session with. Thank you all for registering before ahead of time. I've tried to balance all your choices, the groups that you wanted to go into, and at the same time making sure that we have a bit of an equal participation. So what we'll do now is we will open the breakout groups. You are assigned to a breakout group. If you're happy with the breakout group that you're in, please just stay there. If you're not happy, come back to the main room. I will stay in the main room for a while, and let me know where you want to be, and I'll move you to a separate room. Just that might make it easier. So we have group number 1, where we're talking about science communication with Maria Smilios. Group number 2, where we're talking about amplifying voices by Handaa, led by Handaa. And then group number 3, where we're looking into techniques with Vidya. So I hope you're all ready. Enjoy this half hour. I will send a message 5 minutes before the end, before we come all back to the plenary, to the groups, so that you know. At any time, you can leave the breakout room and come back to the main room. And if there's for any reason that you want to step out. So, but we will come back to the main room and wrap up together to hear main messages from each group for the last half hour of today's masterclass. So hang in there. Let's see if this works. I'm fingers crossed that the technology works with us. So here we go. I'm opening the room. It takes a few seconds before you are going. So please accept. Have fun. Enjoy the session. Hello, everyone who's still here. Did you get an invitation to join one of the breakout groups?
I'm not seeing that. Can you send it again, please?
Maggie, did you get an invitation to join the breakout?
No.
No, I'm not seeing that.
You're
Can you
missing that.
resend it, please, Petra?
Yes, I will try.
Thank you.
And yes, okay, here we go. Jessica, Patricia, Godeswar, Kamar, are you all here? Anyone who is still in the main room, please please join the breakout room, or let me know if you want to change your breakout room, if you want to go to a different session. Patricia, Kamar, Gudeswar, are you with us?
Yeah, yes, I am.
Do you want to join any of the breakout rooms?
Not yet.
Okay. Let me know if you want to, you're right now in Handaa's group, Amplifying Voices. If you want to change the group, I can change you to a different group.
Sure. We'll let you know. Yeah, if it is possible like that, you just like enter in another session of another room of it, which is an amplified session.
You want to go to a different room, Kamar?
Exactly.
Which one? Which would you like to, Vidya's or Maria?
So like there's the first one of it.
Sorry, I didn't get that.
You mentioned the first one of it.
Vidya, the techniques?
Exactly.
Okay, here you go. Kamar, on your screen, it will say join the breakout group. Okay. Godeswar, Prachi? Prachi, are you here? Do you want to join the breakout group? Mm-hmm. Welcome back, everyone. Turning the recording back on. Welcome back, everyone. I'm seeing that there's still some active communication in the other two groups. Maria, you were the only one that was listening to my prompts. Thank you. The groups will close. I forced to close, so now they will come all back in 20 seconds. So with that, we are prepping for a plenary session too. I can't wait. I wanted to jump into every group to just hear how your discussions were going. So I hope you had some good interactions in your group.
We did the little 6-word narrative on, on place or TB. And we talked about how you could build an entire narrative from those 6 words. Like once you get started, how you can begin to talk about a component of an article that is about tuberculosis, because you will need to reference that it's an old disease. You will need to reference the place that you're talking about. So yeah, I wish we had more time though. It seemed to it just flies by.
Well, why don't you take some of the energy from your group, Maria, and take 5 minutes to 5 to 10 minutes, well, 5 minutes, let's say, to do a little bit of debrief. And if you want to bring any of the people from your group forward to say a few words, it's up to you. So let's use 5 to 7 minutes from your group, and then we'll go to Handaa's group, and then we'll go to Vidya's group. So go ahead.
So I think the main takeaway is that when you are writing about, and I use the example of writing about a disease, right? Because everybody was involved in tuberculosis in some capacity in my group, whether it was project managing or being a writer or a doctor or an advocate or working with patients, that, the fear of writing about something is there. It's very real. Like, believe me, every one of us here could tell you, we open up a blank document and you stare at that blinker and you don't know where it's going to go and you don't know if the words are going to come. And so we did the 6-word, exercise to write about place or TB. And it was interesting when they were all lined up 10 in a row, that it started to tell an entire narrative, but a narrative that was coming from the same but different perspectives, what people wanted to focus on. Does anyone in my group want to just mention something about that? Or do you want me to keep debriefing? I had a shyer group. But so, yeah, I mean, that's what I said to them. I said, one person talked about place, one person talked about the disease being the need for community, or the disease being a silent killer, or the disease affecting inside and out. The food, one person wrote about food smells, and, everyone knows that, TB steals the appetite away. When I in my book, one of the mothers just would cook food. They were immigrants from Bangladesh, and all she would do is cook these elaborate meals and bring them to her daughter in the hospital. And she never ate them. So this is, all of these stories are really important to create depth, because what we talked about is, how do you fold a narrative around a human being? And, the main takeaway was, you get somebody to care about the person or the place. So for example, if you want to say TB is proliferating in this particular place, the focus of your piece is going to be the place and then the people in the place. But if you want to say this person is affected, it will start off with the person and then invariably go into the place. But it needs to have enough there for people to be invested in something. And I can't keep stressing that more. I sound like a broken record now. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking. If anybody wants to jump in, otherwise we can go over to Vidya or Handaa. I don't know who's next.
Handaa, do you want to, since you're group 2, I'm just going in order.
Yeah.
I'll hand over to Handaa, and then after that to Vidya.
Yeah. I wish the time was a bit longer. I think if we do this course again, definitely in the breakout, a bigger slot for sure. So I started off with asking, we had 10 people, asking everybody to briefly introduce themselves. And that's why you start seeing these LinkedIns, because I mentioned that since we all care about public health, specifically within public health TB, and then storytelling, those two I think is really good mix. So I thought that, exchanging these LinkedIns, for example, we can have a nice coalition, right? Focusing on TB and storytelling. So we did that. And of course, that took some time. Then I shared some practical do's and don'ts with specific examples of what to consider when they engage affected communities. For example, some of the angles was focusing on choices, encouraging action, for example, providing resources, and also when engaging affected communities, helping them understand the goal of the engagement. So going into more specific details of what we were discussing at the plenary. And yeah, once I finished the practical aspects of things, there was a question which I couldn't answer as we were called to the plenary group, and I'm happy to respond now, which was around how. So her question was that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, was that in the current world where there's so much information about everything, right? And with TB as well, there's a lot of information. And when we write a piece, whether that's case study or whatever, how can we best prioritize that information into the case study? That was the question. I will start us off and answer, but I'm keen to hear from Maria and Vidya as well on that question. But in my own book, it was a lot easier, right? Because it was my story. So I was writing from the perspective of someone who survived, overcame, and utilizing that to advocate for that cause. So I started off with that human story, and I tried to give as much background as possible so that people are invested in my story, like in the language of films, like character development, right? And then as we were talking at the plenary, including or sprinkling scientific information to make the cases related to stigma, for example, not just in Mongolia, but also it's a global issue, and looking into different case examples. So I think it's important to first of all know what kind of key points you're trying to send across, and then based on that, sprinkling those scientific information alongside the human story. I think that's really key to have that structure. But again, it's not like one size fits all. It depends on your case study's goal. It depends on your case study's audiences. Is it a narrow audience? It's a global audience. Yeah, it's really not one size fits all approach. For me, that was my approach, and I'm keen to hear from Maria and Vidya as well on how do you prioritize information, in your writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Handaa. About what to prioritize, so when I was writing, firstly, I didn't want to write this book. That is the truth. I just did not want to write this book. But I was just so colonized by the stories that I'd wake up with it, and then I'd just go on rants on dining table. And at Diwali and Eid parties, I'd be like telling my friends in Bombay, and eventually someone had to be like, stop, just write. And I went very reluctantly after 2 years to write the book. And around the time that I was writing, I heard that Geeta Anand was this New York Times, this fancy journalist, was also writing a book on TB. And then I was like, oh my God, what am I going to write that she has, And the thing is, if like all of us write a book about TB, even then only you will write the book, only you will tell the story that you've lived. I can write about the same thing, but it'll never be the same. And how do you, in this onslaught of information, how do you, like, it's a haystack, so how do you find your needle? I tend to kind of, so I also I decided to profile Nandita. Again, Nandita is very, a champion who's in the news all the time. And I just decided that I'm just going to tell it in my voice in a way that uh, I did read what's been written about her extensively. And then I realized that she was constantly portrayed either as an advocate or, I found what's not been done. And then the fullness that we spoke about earlier, that she's a Bharatnatyam dancer and she's a sister to someone and she lives in this place and this is what she wants to do. And all of those came from spending time with her. The answer to a lot of these questions about what you prioritize is actually comes with just sitting. We were talking in our group about how storytelling is a lot like making bread. You just have to let the dough sit for a bit, and then you have to come back to it to see if it's rising or if it needs some love. And it'll ask for, if you are on a journey with something, that particular story will ask you for what it needs if you stay with it long enough. I'm not sure how helpful it is because it does sound vague, but it also goes back to, if you read more, like read adjacent literature, because only you can write what you're writing. But none of us are here inventing the wheel. None of us is like inventing fire. So everything we are experiencing, like you feel like this is why literature shows us so much. Like you feel like you're the only one who suffered, you're the only one who's so righteously angry at the world. And then you run into Dostoevsky and Arundhati Roy and James Baldwin, and then you learn from it. And that's what literature, that it gives you words to tell your stories better. Does that make sense?
I don't want to, I agree with everything Handaa and Vidya said, and not to repeat, the only thing that I would add is how to prioritize or how to figure out what you want to tell. When I first came upon this story, I'm not going to tell you that, but the book, I first sold the book in 2016, right? And so one of the things that I did was I knew I was going to write this book, and I looked at the cultural moment, where America was, because the book is bigger than the story of tuberculosis. It is the story of tuberculosis and these nurses, but it is very much a story about health equity and health inequities. And it's a story about race. It's about, the stigma around race. And I looked at where was America in this cultural moment, right? Because I don't think you can write a book without looking at the broader cultural picture, and that will inform a lot of the way you're thinking. And America was in a different place. It was Barack Obama was president. They were looking at universal health care, and then he wasn't president. And so I trashed that, iteration of the manuscript. And, then we were in this divisive place, and people didn't want this anymore. And so I started writing towards that. And then COVID happened. And I'm not going to go into what happened. I was in New York City at ground zero. And I left my house one day and I was with my daughter, and I saw the morgue trucks and I saw that famous hospital that everybody saw with the nurses wearing garbage bags. And it hit me. I was like, I'm going to get rid of that second iteration, because this is a story about who lives and who dies based on the zip code. And nothing has changed in 80 years when it comes to treating people who come from marginalized or immigrant populations. And that became the heartbeat of the book. So for me, when I am writing, I'm always looking at the bigger picture and then distilling it down. And I think it's important to look at where you are in your place, or where the story takes place at a specific moment in time. Because the first iteration would have been wonderful. It was much different, with the presidency of Barack. But that's what became the story. And it told the story of the immigrants, and that was another thing, who was waiting online at Elmhurst. It was all immigrants. It's the same thing as Seaview Hospital. And I needed that story to be told. Personally, my family immigrated from Greece. I'm the daughter of an immigrant. of immigrants. My grandfather had TB. So, you try and keep the personal out, but you also, reach for what you know as well. And you write towards that. So anyway, that's just my little thing about like how you pick and choose. Look at the broader cultural moments of where you're sitting, because they will make the book a kind of evergreen as you want. You don't want it to go in and out, So anyway.
Fantastic. I would like to just open up and see if there's anyone from the groups that wants to share something that you've learned. I saw Kiyuri, thank you for sharing your takeaways from today. Anyone, any question that sparks when you hear the stories from the other groups? I'm just want to open the floor, and otherwise, so please, is there anyone who wants to share something? This is your chance to share a thought or a question that it raised, or something that you've learned today. Would love to hear from some of your voices.
Petra, can I go? Yeah. Let me start with, I think, the article that Vidya shared challenged my own thinking and made me think how compliant a lot of us have become when we write, compliant to a bigger voice because we want to sound politically correct. And I think the article made me think how we can be, we don't have to be so worried about being nasty and sort of reignited something in me. The other thing I really took from our little group session were two things. One is there's just so much beauty when we even write our 6-word title. And that can contain the world if we really are thoughtful about it. A technique that that's going to stay with me from my session with Vidya is, just putting everything, your first draft is your vomit draft. And I really love that visual again, because I think now every time I struggle with writing, I'm going to tell myself it's just my vomit draft, and then we can subsequently distill it to rose water. So yeah, thank you so much, Petra, and all of you for your thoughts. It's made me at least focus a little better. Thank you so much.
I love the image of rose water. The vomit draft is very visual too. Anyone else? Please share a thought. I see some great thoughts in the chat, but would love to hear one more voice before I ask Vidya, Maria, and Handaa for their kind of closing thoughts.
Is I may, so I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Go on.
If I may, if Deepan is still with us in our group, she shared a very beautiful poem. If she'd be willing to share it with the bigger group. It was written during COVID, and it's not to put Deepan on the spot. Are you with her? Oh, she's not. Okay. I don't think she's with us.
Charles, go ahead. You unmuted yourself, right?
Yeah, so I just wanted to also express join other colleagues to say thank you for this, Petra and the team, for organizing this, and for the facilitators, Andrea, Vidya, Maria. This is great to know. I just wanted to know, after this, what next? Is it possible for us to, maybe, for instance, I want to do a story. Can I reach out to Vidya? Can I reach out to Maria? Can I reach out to, you guys? How do we take it up from here? It would be nice to, not just end here, but just to take this up going forward. I'm really interested in moving this forward from here. Thank you.
I think at the end of the session, we will all share our email addresses. Please, if you write anything, please share with us. I'll be very happy to give you editorial feedback or help you in any way that you need. I would be very happy if any writing comes out of it. Every word, any writing is resistance.
Great question. Thank you, Charles. So just to kind of answer the overall question, we will post this link to you, to everyone who has participated. We've kept it on purpose small so that it is as interactive as possible. And we know there is a lot more people interested. So we'll collect interest. If you have people that you think you would recommend this session to, we are going to collect names for a possible second version. So please reach out to us if you have people that are interested to do this type of a workshop. We're hoping to join, for example, McGill University Summer Institute to do this workshop again. But we kept it exclusive. So you're part of the first exclusive cohort that has registered within a small limited number, and we're really grateful for your feedback. So and for your participation. So as a wrap up, thank you for sharing the emails in the chat, but I would like to have each of the three authors give a chance to give a final kind of thought. What we set this session out to do is to talk about storytelling, the importance of storytelling, to amplify voices of those that have gone through their own journey of TB, to share some of the communication targets, like how do you write a story, some of the techniques, but also who shares the story, who is your audience, so some of the mechanics of the writing, and then finally what are some of the do's and don'ts. And I think in the overall session we addressed many of these, but there's obviously a lot more to learn. So if Maria, Handaa, Vidya, you can share with us one closing word before we wrap it up, that would be amazing. Thank you so much. Maria, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. The thing that I would impart is really stories. People are hardwired. We are hardwired to hear stories. We want to hear stories. We want to hear good stories. You know, I always think of 1001 Nights, you know, with the story of Scheherazade, you know, this whole idea that like the only reason that, you know, she was able to survive is because, you know, she kept him hanging on to tell a story, right? We are, as by nature, hardwired to hear stories. And in on some level, you know, when my daughter was young and I was writing this book, I started writing it when she was 4, I was still reading these very simple children's stories to her, right? They're so easy. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end, you know, and that's really what story is. It's kind of what Handaa said, what Vidya said, you know, you have the conclusion, you have the opening and the conclusion and the middle, right? And we all have this proclivity to want to hear stories and to want to tell stories. So don't let this voice that says, I can't tell this story or I don't know how to do it, you know, get you from not telling it. Because I think what Vidya said was also important. Every single one of us here can write a book on tuberculosis, and every single one will bring a different perspective to it. So just think about that when you sit down and have that voice come in, say you do have something to offer, because, you know, people want to hear these stories, especially with tuberculosis. And I think the more stories that are out there, the more people are going to start to pay attention to TB and the need to eradicate the disease and to get treatment, accessible and affordable treatment to everybody who needs it. You know, and the one thing I will say is please do it morally. Please, 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 you know, abide by that narrative humility. And please remember that the people whom you're talking about or talking to or writing about are real people. And we live in this world where we want clicks all the time, you know, clickbaits with clickbait articles. You know, I'm going to wrap it up right now. I pitched this piece because I'm in Asheville, North Carolina now. And, you know, that whole hurricane thing that happened, and everybody was like, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you just evacuate? You know, well, first, we didn't know it was that bad. But second of all, leaving is a luxury. And I pitched this article and I told the people that I pitched it to, I did not, if they were going to change the title to clickbait, they could not publish it. You know, you also can control what you do as well. And I think that's important in today's world. The photographs are the same thing as a clickbait title, you know, so, you know, these are real people. So just remember that. And thank you for listening.
Yeah, I think Maria really summarized it well. My main call to action is that when you engage affected people, just know that we all have shared accountability. So look out for them in terms of ethically engaging them, knowing that they have been through this trauma and that whole narrative humility concept. So yeah, I just hope that next time you engage with them, you will consider this panel and approach with more humility and understanding. Yeah, over to you, Vidya.
I agree with everything Maria and Handaa said. I'm just going to, again, stick with my technical writing stuff and leave you with 4 points. One is writing feels like an elitist sport, but it's not at all. There is this opera of self-doubt among writers. If you could just write on a piece of paper, outlast your doubt, stick it where you write, and you just have to outlast your own self-doubt. Then another trick is slow down where it hurts. In whatever you're writing about, whichever is the painful bit, slow down and unpack and make more of it. And there is, lastly, I'd say that we kept saying read more than you're writing. And there's this whole anxiety of influence that, oh, I copied from there, I plagiarized from there. I would say, again, I'm like, do not follow writing rules. It's you. It's uniquely you. So get influence. Your vomit draft can be copied and pasted from there. It takes a village to print something. There's a fact checker, there's an editor, and by the time it comes out, it doesn't look like it's someone else's. So copy, paste, go, right. And yeah, thank you.
I was applauding, but no one heard me, so I'm going to applaud now. Thank you all three for being so incredibly inspiring. Each of you have really brought a unique lens, and it's been fantastic. I was saying to the first group, I was upset that I couldn't join all three groups in full, so I stuck to the plenary by myself, but I am really looking forward doing this again. Thank you all. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for the three fantastic women authors that have pulled this together. Amazing session, and looking forward to seeing everyone. For those of you that are not part of the TBPPM Learning Network, it's tbppm.org. You can join. There will be a short news session about this, a news message about this, and any future opportunities. They might not be as cool as this one, although I shouldn't say that out loud, but there are going to be for sure webinars and discussions and debate around public-private mix and learning about TB. So thank you all so much. I'm going to stop recording, and I'll leave the floor open if anyone wants to say anything. So thank you all. Thank you all. Till soon, and we'll see you again.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, Petra.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for joining.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, Rabia.
Hi, Petra. Nice to see you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for conducting the session.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. Bye, Maggie.